You're listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis, the only podcast focused on the biohealth capital region. Each episode, we'll talk to leaders in the industry to break down the biggest topics happening today in biohealth.
Hi, this is Rich Bendis. I'm your host for BioTalk. Today, we have an entity that has been on BioTalk before, but just like a lot of programs, there are changes that occur, and we thought it would be appropriate to update what's going on with a program in the federal government called ARPA-H. That's ARPA-H. A lot of our listeners are entrepreneurs or small businesses or people who are looking for access to capital, which is one of the biggest gaps that people have these days. And ARPA-H is one of those resources that has the ability to provide grants and contracts to early stage life science and biohealth companies that may be having challenges, but they really have a good idea. So we're fortunate today to have Sam Gussman-Toh, who is the portfolio manager for the small business program at ARPA-H, as our guest today. So Sam, welcome to BioTalk.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here.
Great. You have not been on BioTalk before, but before we get into talking about the program, a lot of people are very interested into how you got into the role you're in today, a little bit about your personal journey and background and how you ended up in ARPA-H. So if you don't mind, could you just give us a little profile on yourself, Sam?
Yeah, absolutely, Rich. So I did my undergrad at Stanford University, and I really focused on artificial intelligence and got really interested in computer vision. But while I was at Stanford, I actually got introduced to Steve Blank, who had helped create the I-Corps program, and also to Peter Newell, who was the former head of the Army's Rapid Equipping Force. They were two really good mentors for me, and they really taught me how do you develop products and build business models around them, but how do you also hack the government bureaucracy to inject new technologies? And the more I learned about the needs of the warfighter, the more I became motivated to go pursue that. So I ended up joining Pete's company, BMT, after I graduated. It was essentially a startup that was helping the DoD bridge the gap with Silicon Valley. And I helped design and run rapid prototyping programs across the DoD. And it gave me a really diverse set of experiences with many different technologies. And it also taught me how do you get over those kind of bureaucratic hurdles that would keep a small business from doing business with the government. Through that work, I got connected with ARPA-H when it was very early on, maybe 20 people. And I came in to help build the agency up. And I actually ended up writing the first SBIR solicitation that we did. And afterwards, I focused a little bit more on commercialization. But about a year ago, I came back and took over the program.
Great to have you, Sam, because we have a chance to work with you on a regular basis now at BioHealth Innovation. We'll talk more about that later, but there's probably a lot of listeners who are hearing about ARPA-H for the first time, even though it's becoming a better known program within the life science and the entrepreneurial world. But for those who don't know much about ARPA-H, can you give us a little background on how the ARPA-H model works, how it might be a little different than DARPA, DoD, or NIH, and where the small business program is positioned today?
Absolutely. So ARPA-H is the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health. We're our own distinct agency within the Department of Health and Human Services. So the goal and purpose of ARPA-H is to develop moonshot healthcare technologies. And we're really focused on impact. That's our primary objective, is how do we improve the health of Americans across the country? We're not specific to any disease or any one technology. We have a different model too than traditional extramural funding opportunities you might get through the NIH. We're very program manager focused. So we try to find the best scientific minds in the country and bring them into ARPA-H to launch programs. So they come in and they get a limited amount of time. They get 3 years to launch programs and funding opportunities to create new technologies that solve really pressing healthcare challenges. Another aspect about the ARPA model is that we really try to focus on a portfolio approach. So we understand that there's a lot of risk that's inherent when you're doing R&D. And so we don't want to put all our eggs in one basket. So we might fund 3 or 4 companies to all pursue the same objective. And we give them all really rigorous technical milestones that they're trying to achieve. And as any one company fails to meet them, we'll cut them. But at the same time, we'll also do intentional down selections of the companies so that way we can really focus in on the technologies that are providing the best results. And we're able to concentrate our resources to really get the highest ROI for the government. So the small business program fits into the ARPA model by providing specific opportunities that are dedicated to small businesses. ARPA-H sets aside about $50 million a year for these opportunities right now, and we intentionally design them so that it's something that a small business could succeed with. So they're just as ambitious as our large moonshot programs, but they're designed for a startup to be able to participate in. So I'll give you like one example. Some of our large programs require massive clinical trials, and there's no realistic way that a small business is going to be able to afford the costs associated with that, right? So that's like one of the things that I'm looking for when I'm choosing which topics that we're actually going to put out there. We also provide a lot of additional support to the small businesses too. We understand that they have challenges, and we want to make sure that they're able to succeed.
That's really good background information, Sam. You have actually an SBIR program similar to SBIR programs that exist in other agencies, even though they're structured a little bit differently. Can you tell the listeners a little bit just about the SBIR program and how much people can apply for, and what types of businesses are those that are the most typical types of health innovators or businesses that would be eligible to apply for those types of programs?
So ARPA-H gives SBIR and STTR awards. You're absolutely right about that. And the overall eligibility criteria are the exact same that you would have for any SBIR or STTR award. I will say that HHS has actually come out with a cap on how many proposals that companies can make. And so it's 9 per year. So I just want to put that out there for anyone who's listening. But what are we looking for when it comes to companies to participate? Well, we're looking for companies that are really ambitious and they're driven. And we're looking for companies that want to get these technologies to market. If you're just interested in doing research, then that's not really what we're looking for. We're looking for companies that are going to take these technologies and actually get them into the hands of patients. I personally would consider it a failure if we created a breakthrough technology and it just sat on the shelf. So one of the things that we see are we actually attract a lot of non-traditional companies to the program. Over 40% of the companies that we funded, it's actually the first time that they've ever done business with the government. So that also explains why I spend an extraordinary number of hours teaching them how do you invoice the government, because we want to make sure we're paying them too. But we also have a lot of really small, scrappy companies too. I love our scrappy startups. Over 50% of the companies that we work with have fewer than 10 employees. So it's not about how long you've been around or how big you are for us. It's about what are the technologies that you're bringing to us and how are you going to apply them to solve the problems that we want to solve?
One of the things that I find is a little bit unique about the ARPA-H small business program is when we talk about some of the funding mechanisms, generally they're grants when you look at NIH. And I think that ARPA-H has a little more flexible approach, but also it's one that I think can ensure a greater return on the dollars invested, because if people aren't meeting their milestones, as you had mentioned, you have the ability to cut them off, where traditionally people who are receiving the grants end up keeping the grants regardless of whether they're going to be successful or not. So talk a little bit about the funding mechanisms that you have the flexibility to use.
You're absolutely right. So we're using contracts, not grants. And that is a really significant difference between us and the National Institutes of Health. As I just said earlier, we do SBIR and STTR awards. And the STTR awards are specific for tech transition, where you're getting a technology that was developed in a research institution out of the research institution's lab and into a commercializable format with a company. So at ARPA-H, we have a variety of phases that we fund, and it aligns with the overall SBIR and STTR phases. So we do phase ones, which are proof of concept awards. So you don't need to have a lot of preliminary data here, but you need to have some compelling evidence that this is going to work for us. And for these awards, we end up issuing funding for up to $600,000 because we're doing moonshot efforts. We've been able to get waivers from the SBA to allow us to make these higher award amounts. And for our phase 2 efforts, we're trying to build prototypes. So it's a little bit more advanced once you get to this stage. And we end up giving awards for up to $3.5 million. And for these types of awards, the period of performance is usually 2 to 3 years. But for some technologies like AI-based technologies, I've had them as short as 18 months. We also have a couple unique funding capabilities. So we can do direct to phase two. So traditionally, you would have to do a phase one and then a phase two to be able to move on. But for us, we can skip phase one and go directly to phase two if there's preliminary data and evidence that shows that this is a viable approach. And we also can do fast tracks. So we can combine phase one and phase two into a single award.
Yeah, what's exciting about this is basically when you hear a direct to phase two or a phase two award of $3.5 million, generally that's a much larger number than what people would be getting in a phase two at NIH, which generally more is around $2 million. But you also have the ability to go up to 3 years with that contract. And if they're not achieving what they had committed to do in their statement of work with you in that ARPA-H contract, you have the ability to pull it and then reallocate that money to use for other people that have promising technologies. Is that correct, Sam?
Yeah, that's absolutely it. And you're really getting into the concept of how we're approaching our small business program. I want to take as many shots on goal as possible, and I want to just double down on the winners. So I actually really love the new reauthorization of the SBIR STTR program. The new strategic breakthrough technology is going to be huge for us because we're doing moonshot technologies, and it's going to allow us to really invest with industry to bring these technologies to market once we de-risk them through ARPA-H's SBIR STTR program. And I know there was a long gap, about 5 months, while we waited for the reauthorization. Over here at ARPA-H, we spent a lot of time working on improving our processes, but also we have multi-year funding. So we're able to continue working with our performers and funding things that we already had in our pipeline that have been solicited from previous years. So the work really never stopped. It just gave us a little bit more breathing room to experiment and improve the program.
Yeah, I think it's good for the listeners to know that basically it's sort of a new model for the SBIR program, and maybe it's taking a look at best practices that have evolved over the last 20 years in different agencies and finding ways to fine-tune them to basically add more value to an SBIR program for small businesses. And one of the things that I think really sets you apart is some of the commercialization and acceleration services that ARPA-H provides to your performers or the winners, the awardees from the ARPA-H program, to help them move their promising technologies forward in this real world that we're dealing with, Sam. So please talk a little bit about some of these additional services that you can offer.
Absolutely. One of our really critical partners, Rich, is, as you well know, BioHealth Innovation. You guys are instrumental in helping us deliver on these commercialization support services. So we provide an entrepreneur in residence program that allows us to give fractional executives and subject matter experts to our companies. How we approach this, though, is we don't want to just do things for the companies in our portfolio. We really want to teach them how to fish and succeed because we don't want them dependent on us, right? We want them to go off and prosper. So we won't necessarily give access right off the bat to our companies. We want to see them actually start to de-risk their technologies and try to take a stab at it first. One example that illustrates this is I don't necessarily want to be filling out your IRB package for you, but I'm totally willing to have an expert review that and make sure there's no blind spots or potential issues that are going to trip you up and cause delays with the project. Or, if you're getting ready for a Q-Sub meeting and you've never done that before, right? I want our companies to go out and do research and try to figure it out for themselves. But through BHI, we can provide experts to really help and assist them. And so for our program, we're able to provide support across a wide range of needs. So whether it's doing a IP strategy development or your go-to-market strategy, it could also be regulatory or reimbursement. We're really able to meet our performers where they are and try to strengthen them where they might be a little bit weaker.
Yeah, we really appreciate the relationship that BioHealth Innovation has with ARPA-H. And one of the things I think that also makes a little differential advantage for you is that a lot of programs provide these commercialization services as they're further along in the grant process. And I think what ARPA-H has understood is that when you make your statement of work contract with a performer, it's really focused on the R&D, but at the same time, they need to be thinking about these business and commercialization needs at the beginning so they don't have to go way down the path and then have to pivot because they didn't think about something up front from a regulatory pathway or a clinical strategy, or is someone going to pay for this? So we think that ARPA-H has designed this built-in assistance, and the nice thing about this for the performers is they don't have to pay extra for this. This cost is covered through the award that they've gotten through ARPA-H, whereas if you go to some other programs, sometimes companies have to pay for services like this on their own, and it's not covered through the contract status like ARPA-H. So I applaud what ARPA-H has done to design the program to be more flexible to meet the needs of the entrepreneur in the early stages rather than to wait down the road to where they might have to totally pivot because they didn't think about something up front, Sam. So congratulations on that design of that program. When you talk about success stories, I know a few, but I think some of the things that may have been beneficial to your performers, you might have a better insight into, and actually helping work with some companies through the regulatory process and meeting with the FDA and some of these things might not sound like a big area, but a lot of these companies don't have that kind of experience, and they need you to provide the expertise through other resources to help them. So do you have some other examples that you might be able to turn to about things that you see have benefited the companies you've made awards to?
Yeah, absolutely. So one company that I think exemplifies this a lot is Optosurgical. When we started working with them, I think they maybe had 4 employees, but they had great technologies and brilliant minds. They've developed a contrast agent, and so it needed to go through an IND's process. They had never done that before. And so by working through the Entrepreneur in Residence program, we're able to really support them and help walk them through the preparation for their pre-IND meetings and getting that package together and really pull together the entire regulatory package that's going to allow this really amazing new contrast agent to come to market. They've really been able to succeed along a number of different fronts. From a technical standpoint, they even were featured on, the cover of Science Robotics. Like, it's a very exciting company and their technologies, but they wouldn't have the resources to do this on their own. They're negotiating, for example, an exclusive IP licensing agreement right now. And that's something the Entrepreneur in Residence program has been really instrumental in advising them on, is how do you do this? And how do you make sure you don't put a poison pill that's going to prevent an investor from being able to invest in you in the future? So really, I think without this program, we would have had a great technology, but we wouldn't necessarily have been able to bring it to market and actually get it to patients in the future.
Well, that's exciting to see that, because for the listeners, the way this works is ARPA-H does their statement of work with the performer, and then the BHI EIR does a work plan focused on the business and the commercialization needs, which is complementary but not redundant for that performer. So that's another way that ARPA-H can make certain that the dollars that they're investing in these performers are being spent in the most judicious fashion to address what the greatest needs were that were identified when they submitted their proposal. So I think that's a really interesting way to design a program, which a lot of the federal programs have not really built into their investment process. I like the way that I think ARPA-H refers to it as an investment rather than having to spend their budget. So you're making investments like a venture capitalist would, and I see you smiling, Sam. You look at yourself almost like a venture capitalist making investments, not just making a grant and having to spend the budget. You're investing your budget in what you hope will be breakthrough technologies.
It's funny. I was talking with the CEO of one of the companies in our portfolio earlier today, and I was reminding him that we're investors in you. We have been funding you, and we feel like we have a stake. It's non-dilutive, but we want to see you succeed, and you're part of the ARPA-H portfolio. You also mentioned work plans, and I also want to mention one element of that. I really see the work plan that we develop with our entrepreneurs in residence and the companies is almost like a three-way agreement. I want to clearly lay out exactly what the commercialization support is that the entrepreneur in residence is going to be providing to the company, but also what does the company need to be doing to receive it? Going back to that idea that we want to teach them to fish and succeed on their own, I want to make sure that they're pulling their own weight and they're taking the first stab at things. I'm not just going to do it for you. I've had a couple uncomfortable conversations with companies where they've tried to blame their EIR for, oh, they didn't do this for me. It's like, that's not their job. They're not doing it for you. I'm paying for this to support you and to make you succeed. But at the end of the day, it's your responsibility to perform.
No, that's a very good point because, that's something we heard about early in the process is that the teaching of the fish rather than fishing for them. A lot of these companies don't have all of the ability or the funding to approve these kind of expenditures for additions to their team. But as they progress over a 2 and a 3 year period, you're hoping that they're continuing to grow and that developing those internal capabilities and resources themselves rather than always having to be dependent on external resources. So that's another excellent element to your program where you're actually educating the performers at the same time as they're educating themselves. So we talked about this, and I'm sure we're getting some of the listeners excited about how do we get in touch with applying for an ARPA-H potential opportunity, and what about solicitations? How often do they come out, and how do we watch for those things to happen, Sam? So talk a little bit about how you go about soliciting proposals. Who are the ones that make the decisions on those proposals? How frequently do these come out? And how can the listeners learn more about these on an ongoing basis?
Great question. The first thing I want to do is highlight that we just released the draft solicitation and we're holding a proposers day on June 11th. And I would love for all of your listeners who are interested in applying to please sign up and join us at our proposers day. It's a virtual event and you just need to register by June 9th. And if you're interested in doing that, please visit the ARPA-H website. So it's ARPA-H.gov, and you'll be able to find the link to register and join us there. It'll be a great opportunity to learn about the entire solicitation. So the process, how we evaluate proposals, what you need to give us, and also common mistakes that people make. And it'll give you a chance to meet the program managers and hear directly from them about what they're looking for the topics. So for our new solicitation and how ARPA-H does projects, it's organized around topics. So the topics are sponsored by program managers, and they have a problem that they're trying to solve. There is no general AI topic, for instance, right? They're very focused and they have a specific aim. So one, for instance, is trying to create a virtual model of the human brain. We're not going to be specific about exactly how you do that, but we're going to have metrics and milestones that we want you to achieve. So your job is to tell us how you're going to do that. So the way the process works is it's a 2-stage approach. So the first stage is essentially an abstract. We call it a solution summary here at ARPA-H, and it's between 4 and 6 pages, depending on exactly what you're applying for, what type of award. And this is really an initial round for us to say, is this project something that we would consider funding? I do want to highlight that we get a lot of proposals. And unfortunately, while I would love to, I can't fund everything. So it is a pretty rigorous down selection process. The first stage, it isn't encourage, discourage. It's non-binding, and the companies do have the right to move on to the second stage. But it's really intended to give you that quick yes, no, is this something that's within the realm of possibility? And we end up encouraging 4 or 5 times as many companies to move on to the second stage as we're going to probably fund. So the second stage is much more involved. It's not just a 4 to 6 page summary of what you're doing. You have to develop a full statement of work. And here at ARPA-H, we call it a task description document. And this very clearly lays out all of the technical tasks that you're going to be pursuing and what are the milestones and metrics that we're going to use to evaluate them. And these are very rigorous, and we end up spending a lot of time negotiating them with companies. But at the second stage, there is also a pitch. It's a technical pitch, and it's where you get 20 minutes to present what your approach is to the program manager that sponsored the topic. And then you spend 30 minutes getting questioned by the program manager. And it really gets into the technical nuts and bolts. And the reason why we do this transparently is because I want to find the best technical programs that are out there. I don't want to end up funding things just because they have a really good proposal writer that makes it sound amazing. And this is a way for us to really separate the wheat from the chaff.
And basically, let's talk a little about timing. You have a phase 1 with the 4 to 6 pages. How long does it take for someone to get an opinion back from a program manager or someone at ARPA-H related to their 4 to 6 pager and whether there's interest for them to go to a phase 2? How long does that process take?
So our goal is about a month. We'll actually give an estimated date once the topic closes for the first round of submissions for those solution summaries, because it depends on the volume. We've had up to 1,700 proposals before for a single one. So in that case, it took a little bit more than a month. But in general, that's what we're shooting for.
And then when you go to a phase two and you're asking for that full statement of work for them to prepare, how long do you give them to prepare that statement of work? And then how long will it take to review that statement of work by the time it gets to the program manager?
Yeah, absolutely. So we try to give companies 4 weeks to a month at a minimum to prepare and submit all the documents to ARPA-H. We take 2 weeks to review them prior to actually having that technical pitch with the company. And at that pitch, you really do have the chance to meet the program manager and get into the weeds of what it is that you're proposing to do.
Okay, and after they go through that process, let's assume the program manager's interested. How long does it take before a decision make? Who makes the decision on what's going to get funded and not? And then from the time that that decision's made, how long does it take to get a contract executed?
So the program manager is the decision maker. Unlike the National Institutes of Health, we don't do peer review here at ARPA-H. The PM or program manager is the decider. In terms of speed and turnaround time, I hope within a week that we'll be able to have the decisions from the PMs about which companies we want to move forward with. They'll take about a month to go through the internal processes. And the overall timeline to get the contract awarded is really going to depend on the duration of negotiations that are required with the company.
Actually, if you look at on an expedited basis, though, if someone went through a phase one, phase two decision making and a contract, the shortest amount of time probably could be within that 3 to 4 month period. And then if you have a longer period of time for the contract negotiation, it might extend to 4 to 5 months. But from the time that the solicitation came out to you start your phase one, all the way to the time when you're ready to execute a contract could be definitely less than 6 months for sure, which is a lot shorter time than a lot of the other processes that exist related to trying to get a grant from other federal agencies.
Absolutely.
So the key is, where are you right now on solicitations? When is the next SBIR solicitation going to be actually out? You're talking about you're having your June 11th meeting. Are the topics already decided that you will be talking about for that June 11th meeting, Sam?
Yeah, absolutely. So transparently, we released a draft solicitation as soon as we possibly could when the program was reauthorized. We still have to go through an internal approval process to release the final solicitation. But while we're going through that, we don't expect it to change very much. So we wanted to put it out there and get industry able to look at it and start preparing proposals for it. So our draft solicitation contains all the topics that we're going to initially solicit and review. It has 7 topics that are in it. Now, in terms of more topics, we're going to go through this kind of large batch to get these awards moving and moving forward. But once we've done that, I expect to be releasing new topics on a regular basis. I don't want to just do things once a year or even every 6 months. I'd much rather have it once a quarter or even more frequently than that. For me, I want to get as many businesses as possible working with ARPA-H. And our program managers here are already really excited about it. I've had many program managers approaching me with new topics that they want to add to it. Can we squeeze it in? Can we add an eighth or, even a 10th, right? And unfortunately, I'm trying to push the brakes on that a little bit because we've created a brand new process, a brand new solicitation here. I don't want to go through it with too much volume the first time, right? Because we're going to learn and we're going to improve the process both internally, but also for the companies that are applying.
So you're still fine tuning the program. For example, at NIH, it's January, April, and September. What you're saying is you're not going to be as structured a January, April, and September. It might be more frequent and not as predictable on exactly when these calls are going to come out. It's going to be based on when good topics are available, when PMs are looking for things. And there's another thing that comes up is called unsolicited submissions, unsolicited proposals. Do you have the flexibility for somebody who's got a great idea? It's not one of the 7 topics you have right now, but they think that it's germane and they would like to see whether there's an interest within ARPA-H. Is there a way that somebody out there with a great idea, but it's not really on the radar screen of ARPA-H, can submit a topic to someone within ARPA-H?
So the small business program doesn't do an open topic for SBIR or STTR awards. ARPA-H's mission offices do have open opportunities that companies can apply to. And I should mention ARPA-H is organized internally by mission office, and each mission office has a different focus area, range of technical objectives that they're working towards. And so that's reflected in these open ISOs. So a company could give an unsolicited proposal there, but it just wouldn't be part of the SBIR program. And, Rich, when you're talking about the cadence too of us releasing new topics, what I'm finding is program managers really like working with the small business program here. I think a difference from DARPA is that it's maybe not as much of a central focus there as it is here. Our PMs treat our performers just like they're full program performers. It's full contact program management, I like to say. But at the same time, they're actually identifying opportunities for the small business program to support their larger program effort. So they're actually setting aside intentionally scoped aspects of the program that really complement it for the small business program. So we can get small businesses working on these really large transformative efforts too.
You know what's very interesting? We've talked about program managers throughout this whole podcast. This whole program sounds like it evolves or revolves around program managers who actually, in essence, are like a venture capital portfolio manager, and they generally have some area of expertise or interest. And I know that you're recruiting and adding new program managers all the time at ARPA-H. So if you don't mind, Sam, and I know this is something we talked about, but can you talk a little bit more about program managers, how they selected, how they're recruited into ARPA-H, and how important their role is within the ARPA-H program, especially in the small business program?
Absolutely, Rich. And thank you for reminding me about that. I really need to give a plug. If you're interested in joining ARPA-H, you've got a great idea. You should really consider coming here as a program manager. What does it take to be a program manager? Well, you have to have, I would say, an unhealthy balance towards work, right? It's a very busy job. You're constantly working, but you have the chance, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity to bring technologies into the world. You can almost essentially get a blank checkbook to fund these programs. Now, it's a really rigorous internal process to get a program approved, but once you've done that and you've got these companies working on it, you're really able to change science and change the direction of technical development. So you have to have an idea, but you also have to have the technical chops to back it up. And so you go through a rigorous vetting process, and it's almost like you're launching a mini program as you're being evaluated, because we want to see, are you going to be able to do it? Can you answer the questions that come up? And so just like DARPA, we have our program managers try to answer the Hellmeyer questions. And this goes back to the Hellmeyer Catechism from the early days at DARPA. And I encourage all your listeners to go look that up.
In the transcription, we're going to include that so that the listeners can find it. We've been talking with Sam Gussman-Toh, who is the portfolio manager for the small business program at ARPA-H. And Sam, is there anything that we haven't discussed or have forgotten to tell the listeners about related to your program that you think they'd be interested in knowing?
So there's nothing that comes to mind right off the bat, but I just want to give a final plug for interested companies to go check out our most recent solicitation to look at the topics, because you can see exactly what we're looking for it. And join us for our upcoming Proposers Day to learn more about the program. I'll be there. I'll be answering questions about it and also give you an opportunity to meet the program managers.
And that's going to be on June 11th again. And they can learn about that on your website, correct?
Yes. So the ARPA-H Small Business Program, you can learn more about it at arpa-h.gov/explore-funding-SBIR.
Very easy, right?
Yeah.
We'll make sure we have this in the transcription too, so that the people won't forget about it. This is very enlightening for me. I've learned something new today, Sam, and I guarantee you that our listeners are learning more and more about new investment opportunities through federal government programs, and this being one of the more innovative and flexible programs within the federal government. So I compliment you on what ARPA-H is doing, and I guarantee the performers will find working with ARPA-H to be very enjoyable, as well as we at BHI having the chance to interact with the performers that you're selecting in the small business program. So I want to thank you for being on BioTalk today. I guarantee you there's going to be more opportunities for us to talk about new innovations and new solicitations you're going to have in the future. So this won't be the first and only time we have you on BioTalk. Also, we invite you to write any articles that you would like to have published related to this program or success stories as they continually emerge from the ARPA-H program. So I want to thank Sam Gussman-Toh, the portfolio manager for the small business program at ARPA-H, for being on BioTalk today. And Sam, we'll see you on June 11th with everybody else that's interested to learn about more new opportunities with ARPA-H.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and it's great to talk with you as always, Rich.
Thanks for listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis.